Hello and welcome to AHA Conversations, the podcast where we explore the world of HR, people data and analytics. AHA Conversations is proudly brought to you today by Agile HR Analytics, helping HR teams turn people data into real insights without needing a PhD, big budgets or a 12-month implementation. From dashboards to decision-ready tools, Agile HR Analytics really gives you the power to see what's really happening in your workforce and what to do next. As we're recording this from Sydney, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. And I also extend to the lands of those who are listening to this podcast today. Today's conversation is centered on the evolving role of the Chief People Officer, how it's shaping and evolving in the face of AI, workforce disruption, and rising expectations from boards, CEOs, and our people. To help spark this discussion, I'm hugely delighted to welcome our special guest today, Rita Darcy, who is currently the Chief People and Culture and Privacy Officer of Group Colleges Australia. And she's previously served as a Chief People Officer at the likes of IKEA, Coles Group and Energy Australia. Rita's career has spanned large-scale retail, energy, logistics, the non-for-profit sector, and now in education, often during periods of significant transformation, challenge and growth. She brings a wealth of knowledge and perspective that really blends the commercial with the human and the strategic with the deeply practical. So Rita, thank you for joining us today. It's our absolute pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much, Philip. And the pleasure is all mine. I'm so pleased to be here. And I'd also like to acknowledge where I'm coming from, which is the land of the Bidjigal people.
Great, thank you. Well, the context and I suppose the conversation today is what really sparked this was firstly we hosted an executive dinner event here in Sydney where we had over 15 chief people and culture officers in attendance from small, medium-sized organisations, and we really had a fascinating conversation, really talking about this very topic around you have to be living under a rock if you've not heard of AI and the future of work and what that means. I think there's a lot of press coverage going on, and you're kind of seeing some of the implications of that with a bunch of redundancies happening in the consulting sector. We've seen Microsoft recently announce, and all kind of I suppose pointing to as a result of AI. And we're even seeing some of the grad schemes and things. I think that was one of the more recent ones that I heard being significantly reduced as a result of that. So, but on the other side of the fence is that there's a huge amount of opportunity, and I suppose the pace of change and what that means really is kind of, I suppose, asking the question, well, what does this mean for people and culture teams? But more importantly as well, the evolving role of the Chief People and Culture Officer. So amazing to have such an experienced CPO as yourself. And really looking forward to, I suppose, getting stuck into kind of some of the questions and things around this. So I suppose my first question then, Rita, is that you've seen the CPO role evolve across a number of different industries and sectors. In your view, what do you feel has fundamentally different now, and what do you think still maybe holds true?
Yeah, fantastic question to start on, Philip. Thank you. And actually quite a big question as well, and maybe even, perhaps even a controversial question in a sense. So let me start off by saying, first of all, that I believe the CPO role has been evolving way before now. I think we've been on a constant wave of evolution. And I'm not going to present it as I would do to my uni students in terms of the trajectory of HR. But what I'd like to say on that question is that the expectations of the function has really changed. And whilst it was fitting to actually be the guardians of things like policy and compliance and legislation. The role has really shifted from that, noting that that still forms part of the role, and you've got to get your basics right and have your foundation laid. But the shift has gone from that traditional HR to a real performance-focused strategic leadership role. So we're no longer just the guardians of culture or policy. We're actually now real co-architects of enterprise performance, enterprise-wide performance, and it's incumbent upon us to not only understand within the organisation, but outside of the organisation. And, the great David Ulrich, who from the US, who, has a long history of forming and shaping HR, really talks about that outside in. And I think that has been known to us through the literature, but now that's actually even far more important to understand what those drivers are, and we need to actually operate outside of our function. Yeah, even though we're the experts in our function. So we still look after people, but I think there's a greater focus on achieving outcomes.
I love that, and also as well. I mean, I love the fact you touched on Ulrich. Obviously deemed by many as the grandfather of modern HR.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And I think, coming back to the question, I mean, is it fair to say, I mean, during that time and era, we've kind of moved from this kind of operational reactive to kind of being this kind of more strategic function. And just from my observations, I mean, back a while ago, we had these big HR teams, big business partner models and generalists, and now that's kind of shifted to kind of being more specialized and strategic, functions, as opposed to kind of more of this responding and reacting. And I liken this a bit to, why people analytics became very popular. And a thing was that, traditionally we've just tend to focus on the operational reactive reporting. It's kind of already happened, and how can we start to then preempt what things are heading our way and how we're going to respond to that, and leverage some of the more advanced analytics techniques to help HR peek around the corner and think, okay, what are these things that are potentially coming our way? And but then who could have predicted COVID? But but that kind of resonates. Would you say that's kind of fair, that in your time and experience, you've really observed that shift from kind of this transactional operational to now being this strategic driver, and even broadening beyond the HR function to actually bleeding into other areas, of the business and so forth?
Oh, most definitely, Philip. And the caveat I would put out there in response to that point, and to bounce some thoughts around, is that we still have organisations who are small. We have even medium size organisations that are quite lean. We have the not-for-profit sector, and I had the great privilege of working for Bernardo's for 4 years as their CPO. And lean is lean. So you don't have a cast of thousands, and you still have to work with models where people are generalists and still business partners. And you're not able to have all those internal resources that's specialised in a particular stream, whether it's employment relations, learning and development, et cetera, et cetera. So, at times a HR function or a HR team members or a CPO could still be wearing a number of hats. And in terms of the traditional side, though, is again about maintenance and foundations. So an organisation has to get that right before it can move beyond that. So I don't want to underplay the importance of that, but it's about performance and outcomes.
Yeah.
And when we talk about, just to catch your comments around people, analytics and data, I mean, I am so excited about data. I love data. I strangely walk into new places that just don't seem to have data, but also have a lot of transformation going on as well. So we don't have the insights to lead big agenda items forward. And it's a double-edged sword with data, because on one hand, you're starting to get that information and insights. But then on the other hand, by communicating on those insights, there's now an expectation to be responding.
Yes.
And doing something with it. So, traditionally HR would report, whether it's turnover or absenteeism or, who's got more than 8 weeks annual leave in the kitty, and we need to get that off the balance sheet. But now the data is deeper and it is broader and it is telling us more. Are we prepared to work with it? Do we have the courage to actually really get those insights? And those insights now are actually enabling us to predict more.
Yeah, and that's a great segue actually into kind of my next question, which is kind of really around the CPO as a performance architect, essentially, because I think many of us are being asked to drive culture, performance, trust, compliance. I've noticed you've also got privacy in your job title, which is close to my heart. And now data and AI strategy as well. So, can one function realistically own all of that? And I think just to kind of bring this to life, I think many listening, and if you're not listening, well, I can't remember the name of the specific company, but I know there was a bit of a viral a conversation going around LinkedIn where a CPO role was merged with the CTO role at a US-based company. And I think everyone was off the back of that saying, is this the future? Are we going to be merging IT and HR together? I mean, the question is, was that done because of the individual had that specific skills which made it, or actually that was a very intended thing to bring those things together? But I suppose it comes back to, really, can one function realistically own all of that? So I suppose it kind of, aligns nicely to what you were just saying before in terms of, the era of the insights and how we're using that information. And now we've got more sophisticated tooling and things. But how do you see that kind of working? Do you think that can realistically be all sat and owned in one place, or do you see that more as just better cross-functional collaboration between, your kind of peers in other enabling functions and so forth?
Yeah, it's a great question, and what a great development for that organisation. Anyway, and look, that could be circumstantial, right? It could be dependent on the individual's backgrounds. However, I don't think one function can be the master of all domains. But the CPO role is really uniquely placed to orchestrate the intersection of the moving parts. And so the role is about that integration, not whether we've got the perfect org design. And this is where sometimes organisations fall short, that they have their strategic objectives and they want to go in a particular direction. So, if it is about really advancing technological transformation within an organisation, then, the next piece comes as to how do we design our organisation to facilitate that, and then what roles do we need, or skills, is what do we need? But I think what we fail to actually then think about is the behavioural change attached to that. So you can have one function own it, HR and technology, but do we actually have the right people underneath that, and have we got the right behaviours? And so that's the layer I don't think we address very well. In terms of, it's always easy to design, but it's harder to manage the behaviours and how people think and respond to that, and what they do with the design, linking back to the strategy. So Look, I mean, I, I, I think if that was me, I don't necessarily would want to take on IT, but I'll tell you why. That's because I think it takes a multitude of different talented people to come together and make those end goals work. So I feel like the CPO is more the conductor than the
Yeah.
soloist.
Yeah, and I love that, and I mean you're hearing again. I think a lot of people are referring it to, you know, um, human first AI or person centered approach, you know, and like human in the loop always. And so I think we're hearing a lot of this. But again, I'm going to be a bit provocative and controversial. But I suppose my worry though is that is HR even in the room with these conversation when it comes to kind of AI, or is it, you know, strategy, IT kind of going off in a bit of a silo, and then it's right, HR, we need this information or we need this from you, and we're kind of deploying it. And so I suppose it's, you know, if we want to be driving and orchestrating, as you're saying, like, are we even in the room having the conversation? Do even people think of that, or is it a bit of an afterthought? So again, purposely trying to be a bit controversial there, but in your experience, you know, has that been the case? And if so, how what would be your advice to kind of, yeah, making, you know, how can we ensure that we're there driving and orchestrating that and being in those conversations? Because as you say, it's not, we can't just operate in silos, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, look, it's hard for me to factually comment on is HR even in the room and how are they actually embracing technology. I'd like to think that at that CPO level there is already a great level of curiosity and interest and discussion. And hopefully it is coming back to that, what does it mean from that human in the loop perspective? But I also know that we're still talking about things like people and culture instead of workforce and culture, because we know now that a workforce consists of not humans. So the vast majority of the composition are humans, but in fact we now have technology doing work.
Yes.
So whether that be the chatbots, you know, robots, etc., Gen AI. So there is all of this out there at the forefront of replacing jobs. And I think there is, because HR is so people centric, there could be that fear of, well, what does it mean
Yeah.
if they are no longer in the organisation and now we're suddenly controlled by, you know, and I think we're you know, we may not be too far off. I mean, look at the Jetsons, right? I mean, but I think there could be a fear or a trepidation of even what does it mean for our function?
Yeah.
You know, because we are known to be the human experts. And so if it's not just about humans anymore, then what does it mean? So I think there is potentially a need, and I say this, maybe I'm being controversial as well. I think we have to have an out-of-body experience here and go, let's stop thinking about us and what it means for us, and think further ahead, be futuristic.
Yeah.
And do we want to be part of the solution, or do we want to not be anywhere in the solution,
Yeah.
or even in the future?
Yeah, and I love that, and I suppose, you know, although being a bit provocative intentionally, so I think for me, I personally, for one, am hugely excited and optimistic about the future, what it means for us as a discipline. I love the discipline that we're in terms of it's about people, but it is a bit of a paradox as well, because
Mm.
on one hand, we're hearing some of this negative press and like the consequences of when AI gets it wrong, and we've got in as well as like uplift around data governance and privacy. We could spend a whole day
Mm.
talking about new GDPR type legislation coming over here in
Yes.
Australia and what that means, because that's quite different for this market, but not so much in other areas. But I think your point around the fear is a really, really important one, because again, I've seen this with people analytics as a discipline. There was this, it wasn't a thing, 5, 8 years ago. It's still relatively new, but actually analytics has been around for a long time. But
Mm.
in other areas like marketing and things. So there was all this hype and expectation around, okay, we're going to leverage this. But the reality is that still 84% of organizations are still doing that operational reactive kind of reporting, and they haven't really progressed much beyond there. So the question is, well, are we really having the value? And I suppose for me, the call to action here is that we can't stand on the sidelines and wait. How are we going to lean in, embrace this, and actually guide the outcome, as you're saying? And we can't do it in a silo. We've got to do it with the broader community. So I love that, but if we think about HR, people don't go into HR with strong data analytics
Mm.
backgrounds, and let alone AI and tech, and engineering and all of these kind of still data science. And we don't need to be, particularly now with the tools and things. So I just feel like for me, that fear, and comes back to that point around behavior change.
Mm.
How do we get people from kind of fear and resisting, and maybe to kind of embracing and actually leaning in and getting out of their comfort zone, and you know that's kind of what I want to see, and I suppose that's kind of my rally call for people and culture teams. But again, I suppose it starts with the top and the CPO. So again, I
Absolutely.
realise I'll get off my pedestal now, Rita. But I think my question there back to you is, again, I don't, it's a broad statement, and I
Mm.
realise that there's maturity levels, and different
Yes.
regions and sectors are going to have different maturity. You got your big organisations, and then your small, medium. So
Mm.
we can't just do big umbrella throwaway statements. So, but I'm just, sensing from, the people and the clients and things that I speak to, there's this bit of kind of fear, but excitement. And it's kind of, it could go either way. So, how do we kind of
Mm.
shift the dial to say, look, let's embrace this. Let's be the people in the
Mm.
people centered, or the human in the human, centered loop in terms of driving this. So yeah, do you have any views or advice and things from that perspective, Rita?
Yeah, absolutely. Such great This is why I always love chatting with you, Philip, because you kind of, toss my brain around, and then I just come out with so much more. Um, yeah, look, there's a couple of reflections I have on what you've just said. I believe that I'm like you. I am so excited about the technology, because I really do feel that we can do things much better and differently. Now, even as a function, it can free up so much space to get rid of all those transactional things, spreadsheets, SharePoint folders, things like that that just take up a lot of time, and start focusing on creating impact, workforce design, reskilling, and helping leaders have good relationships with their people. I mean, we haven't cracked that chestnut around
Mm,
leadership being optimum and effective. I mean, constantly hearing, whether it's in the press or wherever, about things that have gone wrong from a leadership perspective. So I see huge opportunity putting energy into
mm,
those areas that we haven't been able to resolve, because we're time poor and we're drawn back into all those operational transactional
yeah.
functions. So bring it on. Um, I would also say that uh, the executive team, I've often said to my CEOs that I've had, people watch you. People watch you more than you think they watch you. They watch everything. They watch how you dress, what car you drive, you know, whether you speak to them in the elevator when you're coming up, what are you having for lunch? They watch all of those things because they're insanely curious about, you know, how different you might be to them or the same. And so they're looking in the same way at the exec team, and they're looking at in the same way at the most senior HR person. And so if we're fearful of what's to come, that creates the contagion for the rest of the organisation. And we have no hope of taking people sacredly on the journey that's ahead of us. And so that comes back to looking after our people. So by fearing it, not embracing it, not trying to get ahead of the game and be part of the solution, comes with all these other problems, and that's the contagion you create within the organisation. And so you're on the back foot. People just they're waiting for you to give them hope and security. And so then the other comment I have to make is that the role needs to then shift from, you know, having that excitement and having the right sense of hope and I mean, there's never certainty, but at least hope and care, to then going, okay, what do we now need to do to redesign our organisation? And this is why I often say it's not workforce planning anymore. That's really outdated. It's not about we have these roles and these skills and you know, and we need these numbers at these hours and blah, blah, blah. We've got systems to do that now. What we need to do is be thinking ahead and going, what roles do we need in the future?
Yeah.
And how do we get our workforce ready? And I know that sounds so big and it seems so like simple, but it's a hard piece of work. But until we engage with what's ahead, then we are doing our organisation a disservice. And our people from not getting them ready and being their guardians in the journey.
I couldn't agree more, Rita. I love that. And to your point as well, you know, I'm always a big fan that, you know, we're an enabling unit. We're here to enable the business and execute on the business strategy. And so we've really got to understand, well, what is that strategy and vision? Where do we envision ourselves? And then how are we going to enable that through the people, and, you know, how we can best leverage the technology to kind of do that in smarter, quicker ways. But I think you touched on another point there, is that there's also, it can be quite overwhelming because there is so much that we could do, so many possibilities. I think the art of the possible has never been so big, and also the pace is just relentless in terms of kind of what is possible and the change. So it almost feels like there's an ocean we could quite easily try and boil in one go. So it's kind of, how do we make it digestible and not overwhelm people? And I think naturally people will kind of resist and go back to what's familiar and comfortable. So how do we get them to embrace? So one of the things, actually, I'm doing a workshop tomorrow, in fact, on 101 prompt engineering in Copilot for the HR team in an organization, because they've just enabled Copilot. And I think that people have had a bit of a play and thought, okay, this is not that good. And then they've not realized there's a bit of an art in terms of the prompting and how you get the best use of this, and where would you apply that? So, you know, how could you leverage it to kind of, you know, improve your Excel game? So again, to the point around, here are just some small incremental things that could maybe make your day-to-day tasks a bit easier, simpler, speed them up. And as you said, what are some of those really repetitive things that we could do just to kind of get them experimenting and have a go, and then maybe share some of the prompts and stuff that they're doing. And again, I'm going to go completely rogue and rabbit hole here, Rita, but I think this is for me where I feel like the HR superpower is that the AI is just a tool at the end of the day. It's a technology. what we bring as a discipline is the context. We know the business. We have a finger on the pulse of, you going and speaking to the business. How are they feeling? What's going on? So actually being able to bring in that context as well as the data and the insight and things, I think for me, that's where the real magic can happen. And I think, these days you don't need to be a PhD data scientist and things. You can have like an agent that can start to do this now. But I think what becomes more important though, and I know you'll resonate with this, it's that critical thinking. So it's like the other danger is, and I think, there's been concerns around some of the younger generations now, it's almost just taking the output as gospel, applying no critical thinking and questioning and just going, yep, okay, I accept that's the fact, and then kind of running off with that. So again, how do we start to kind of weave that in to the fold? And like I say, it's just one data point. Again, if we left it to the algorithms, and again we've seen this, that while hiring white middle-aged men, we've got to factor in diversity. We've got rules and regulations to follow, bias, unconscious, conscious biases, all of these kind of things. When you're applying that in a particular business, it's that one size fits all is no more, and that's what I think we can do, is be a lot more tailored and things with this kind of technology. So I suppose with that's I suppose a bit of the AI challenge is that what's your take on how AI is really reshaping the HR function now? As I say, it's not just about the tools, but expectations of how we lead and make decisions, the behavior change adoption. I know we've touched on a lot there, but just again, your humble view and take is that how do you feel AI is reshaping the HR function right now, and maybe some of your views on where you see that kind of going? And I suppose it's this glass half full, but there's always the dark side as well, the good, the bad, the ugly, and obviously data governance, privacy, these kind of things are important, and the safeguards. But yeah, I know that's another big question for you, Rita. I'm putting you on the spot again, but how do you feel AI is reshaping HR at the minute? Is it for the good, the
That is
better?
another big question. Um, Gosh, I have to have a good
Evolving.
sleep after this podcast. Look, it is. Well, I mean, I guess it's the question could also be, what is the potential
Yeah, I love that. I
of
love that. In fact,
of it shaping? Because I don't think we're necessarily there yet. But I definitely, as I pointed to a little earlier in the podcast, I do believe it actually gives us bandwidth to work differently and on different things that are very important for the future, and chestnuts we haven't been able to crack from the past. And I think the example I gave, is around really coaching leaders, and I don't want to. Whilst I don't want to labour that, but leaders are really squeezed. I think it's a tough job to be a leader. I really do. They've got the strategy piece. They've got to lead a team. They've got we've got a rise in mental health issues. We've got new workplace legislation pouring in that they have to learn and be on top of. So the role is getting more complex. So if you take that just as one example where we can really lean in to support our leaders to be, much more confident, equipped, and agile to be able to do what they need to do and take people on the journey, because we can't do that as a function. But most definitely that freeing up time and that redirection of time. But I loved your point too. It's interesting around the critical thinking, because AI there is that risk that, yes, I've got to produce a performance management letter on this really complex situation, and I can stick it into ChatGPT or Copilot, and with the right prompts. So yes, go to Philip's course, and produce this letter, and then the next thing, it goes out to the employee.
Yeah.
And we're not thinking, we're not stopping, we're not thinking. So there is actually what I think we have to do is embrace it, but to a point you made, with the right governance and the guardrails.
Yes.
To make sure that we're not inadvertently working at speed and not with the right governance in place. So I think, critical thinking is actually a big one. I'm really worried that, I think it's still up there as when you look at a number of these, whether it's PwC or these organisations, Boston Consulting Group, where they talk about what skills will be required, what are the top skills and what are required. So sure, definitely relationships is definitely up there, communication, but critical thinking.
Yeah.
Well.
Well, I was thinking, I was literally having a conversation about this yesterday, and I think the analogy I used was actually in a different sector, in the medical sector. So previous life, that was kind of an area I was in, and in the UK, certainly, we had the concept of like a GP, and it was like a family GP that was, knew everything about you and your family history. And you would always go to that person. Whereas, like, fast forward, it was less about like, I want to go and see this person. I need to see somebody now. I just want to see somebody out of convenience. But what I'm doing is I'm Googling them and their credentials while I'm in the waiting room. And then when I meet them, I'm using AI to kind of go, here's all my symptoms. I think I've got this. And then they end up having a bit of a sparring debate session with the GP around, well, I don't think it's that. Well, this is what ChatGPT told me. Yeah. So it's almost like with the outputs now, it's like maybe we're having to review the prompts. So actually, did you give it the context? How good was the prompt? Did you go through with any critical thinking and challenge, or did you just literally go, here's a one line, here's an output, and actually, there you go. And almost through education, I know you're in kind of education now, but I mean, how we, everyone is going through and coming up with the same outputs. How are we gauging that, how they got to that? It's almost like my kids now, you get half the point for the maths question, but the other half is actually, how did you get to that? So maybe is that what we think in terms of how we're going to actually start to gauge that critical thinking, and rather than just here is the output, how did we get to that? And are we going to be transparent around, well, actually, yes, I use ChatGPT, or actually I use Copilot, or is that going to be a perceived a thing as like, oh no, this is my original thinking, or actually, yeah. So I think these are some of the conversations now. And I don't think people are actively disclosing, but we always tell, is there a emoji or a hyphen, and it's like, should we just be transparent and just say, look, this is where it's from, it's thoughts, but this is some of my original thought or prompting or context that I brought in with some help,
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, it's so true, isn't it? And I'm very honest when I use it. And in fact, I say sometimes to, colleagues, just put it through ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And then, speed it up. Don't sit on it. You don't have to sit on it this long. Just put it through ChatGPT, and then you can just spend the time refining whatever it is, you're doing. Yeah. I believe in honesty, and I've encouraged it from my team as well, to actually use it cautiously, to actually think about why you're using it, and think about what you're going to do with what it actually gives you.
Yeah.
So do pause, think, adjust, act. It's that really have some sequencing
Mm.
to this. So yeah, look, I think we should be honest, but then organisations need to help employees as well understand
Yeah.
what their position is and whether, and I think from memory in that at that dinner we had some great input from other CPOs around where they've actually developed some excellent policies and the
Mm.
education that they've taken their workforce on to A, demystify it, B, bring clarity to what's allowed and what's not
Yeah.
allowed,
Yeah.
to have the honesty box,
Yeah.
there but then to also educate in how it how can it be used well and create
Responsibly.
efficiency. So I think the really progressive organisations have done a lot of that, which is excellent. And then I think there's less risk of those things that you're actually describing. But I'd like to, I don't even know how many organisations even have a policy
Yeah, well, and this
on it.
exactly, and I think this is your point earlier, which I kind of love, is that the workforce is no longer about people.
Yeah,
We've got the robots, the chatbots, and things. So do our policies cover those? And like
yeah,
when things inevitably go wrong, what then? And I think this is where a lot of the legislation is coming in to ensure that actually we need a human owning that process end to end, and we can't just go, oh, it was the technology that went wrong, and there's lots of
correct.
cases. I think there's a famous one with a Canadian airline where their chatbot wrongly advised a bereavement kind of
Mm,
policy, and yeah, that they basically turned around and said, look, no, actually, that's not the case. That a human needs to own that. You can't just blame the tech. So
mm,
again, and this goes to the question earlier around, well, if IT and strategy are in the room and they're kind of making ultimately the decisions without HR, when things go wrong, they start to impact people. Does that
mm,
then become a people issue and problem and risk that we need to own and solve? So
mm.
again, I think I like your point around like maybe we do need to double down on the guardrails and the governance and the responsibility and how we're trying to educate people and have that greater transparency, needing the white space to experiment,
Mm,
sharing that. Do we see kind of more hackathon type things
yeah,
where we're kind of finding creative ways of how we can use this to solve everyday problems or complex things but I think right now, and this is just my personal view and sentiment, is that again I think there is still quite a bit of fear, uncertainty, and
mm,
certainly I've seen in the government sector in Australia, they've been very strong going out with messaging like be aware around all of these agents that can like transcribe conversations and being listened to and things. So again, I think
mm,
that's kind of feeding that fear a bit.
yes,
And the reality is, whether you have a policy or not, Rita, I think the reality is it's here. People are using it, whether you like it or
correct.
not, whether you have a dedicated server or they've got their own personal ones. It's happening. So it's here, it's now.
Mm,
But I think that's a great question, and I suppose challenge is how do we responsibly try and move things in the right direction, but not, I suppose, becoming the police of it all and
that's
overly,
it. Yeah,
you know,
yeah. I mean, and I don't think there's there's not a one size fits all. I mean, it all comes down to your sector, your laws, your compliance requirements, your risk framework, the board's risk appetite, um, line of business. Working at Bernardo's, I mean, we had vulnerable information. We worked with vulnerable children and families.
mm,
So there is a really strong case why you do have to, for example, double down on the compliance and the policing because there's a lot at stake. And I could think of, other financial institutes and all of that as well that fall into that category. I think the the thing to be cautious about is that it's, yeah, see, there's this fine balance because
It's a
when we're
paradox,
talking,
right?
yeah, because when we're talking about Gen AI and technological transformation at scale, it all is under the umbrella of innovation.
Mm,
Yeah, progress, innovation. Now, you then get the policies, the procedures, the police, all
yeah.
the P's, right? And choke the organisation with that kind of stuff. Straight away, the what you are silently saying is we can't really innovate here
Yeah.
because we have too many guardrails and we have you in chains.
Yes. Bureaucracy gone mad, right? And
Yeah,
over
totally.
engineering.
So there's got to be a balance,
Yeah.
you know. I think there's got to be a real balance there. So organizations have to think deeply
Mm,
about even how they write the policies
yeah.
and how they enforce the policies and etc. without stifling progress, innovation, and people being curious
Mm.
to experiment and try things.
100%. And actually, the more you think, I'm going to reference Ulrich again. He
Yeah.
recently wrote an article around kind of paradox navigators, and actually, his research showed that when we think about what ultimately drives the business outcome, that's where he said that, out of all the different areas, the paradox navigators were coined with having the most success. So actually, as a HR function, do we need to get the surfboards out? Because if you rightly called out, on one hand, yes, we need to uplift the data governance, privacy, GDPR legislations evolving and changing, but on the other hand, we still need to innovate. We still need to take risks to be successful as a business. So they are literally two polar opposites on the end,
Yeah.
and therefore, like, the biggest killer and I'm working with an amazing tech company right now, and their biggest killer is indecision and no action, and actually just sitting back is like, the organizations that are going to be successful are the ones that can move quicker, faster than their competitors. So if we're just kind of here, paradox, I don't know what to do, how are we paving through and trying to find a way forward and navigate this? And so, yeah, so I think actually, talking to you, that for me, yeah, is something. I think, yeah, we need to get the surfboards out, and I think we need to find a way how we're going to navigate through these tensions. And I think, as you've said, it is getting that right balance, that maybe we don't want to go and gold plate everything. How do we get the minimum? And without having to stifle the innovation and the business going off, and saying, look, no, you can't do that, can't do this. Yeah, I think that's a really, really valid point around that balance. I don't have a solution, but I think,
No, and there's no magic
yeah,
pill for that. There isn't, but it's so true. Like if you don't get on board and don't move and don't make decisions, I mean, you'll have the blockbuster effect of irrelevance.
yeah, the
So
future is coming, or is it already here?
yeah. Well, that's that. I mean, it somewhat drives me insane every time I sort of see a something about this conference or this about the future of work. I'm like,
Yeah,
it is here. I mean, of course, there's a constant future that we've got to try and get on top of, but I think we sort of maybe are using that as a protective guard of maybe we don't have to act yet,
yeah, and
like
that's
because
it.
it's in the future.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's
We're
like
going to
this
sit back and
canvas, right?
wait, see what others do. It's like, what's that
Yeah.
old analogy? The canary in the mine. If the
Yes.
canary dies, everyone else runs. So who's going to be that first organization to move and go? And we're like, oh, what did they do? But that's the kind of thing I sense as well. So it's kind of like, how do we lean in, be brave, have a go, but as well as like, how do we help bring and share the journey along the way and the learnings and things. And again, we want to apply the best judgment. We want to be responsible. We've got to factor in
Exactly.
all the great thinking and work that we do as a function. But yeah, how we kind of embracing and seeing. And that's what I want to see. It's like, when do we get to the actual use cases of actually, this is what organization X, Y, and Z have done. But look, I'm mindful of time, and I think we've spoken for almost an hour now, Rita. But final kind of question for you was that, around the voice at the table, and we started this whole conversation around the role as the CPO, and you've worked closely with CEOs and boards. What do you feel they're now expecting from the CPO that's maybe different to 5 years ago?
Yeah. Oh, look, I think boards are also trying to work themselves out in amongst, the dilemmas of corporate failure and risk and governance and so forth. But I have seen a step change, and I've had great boards that I've worked with, so I've been quite fortunate. But I know that they may not have been so tolerant to me in a CPO role if I missed a few vital things in interacting with a board. And then that goes the same with your CEO as well. So, I think the thing is that they want you to be on top of your game. They want you to have data and be evidence-based. They want the numbers, they want the stats, and they want the insights. So, to be able to go in, for example, to a board meeting and noting you've obviously prepared your papers and they've read them, don't spend time repeating what they should have read in preparation for their meeting, to be able to walk in and say, the questions I hope you ask me today are, and to think like a board member, to not prepare for that board meeting, to talk through operational things, but to be prepared to answer things that a board member is worried about and thinking about. And so, at a very fundamental level, you need to be able to speak the language of the business. They want you to know the drivers. They want you to have financial acumen. So I would say to emerging CPOs, if you don't have the strongest skills in finance and data, that's okay. But you need to find ways to acquire that. Because as soon as you step into that role, that's a non-negotiable.
Yeah, and I imagine as well the ability to influence, and again, this is kind of, and the more I think about it, there's so many synergies with people data analytics. It's getting from like we didn't have a lot of data to now we've got an ocean of data, and how do we take that to what's the insight to then, okay, we've got all this insight, but ultimately you can have the biggest team, best tools in the world, but
Correct.
if no action's taken off the back of that, it's all a bit of a waste of time. So it's that, how do we get from the insight to action, and actually start moving the dial and holding people to account. So, preparing you with the data and the facts to go in and have those tough, constructive challenge conversations,
Correct.
to preempt, the next set of questions that come, to then go, well, actually, this is what we think we should do. This is how, our advice, is this true strategic enabler and function. Now let's hold us and others account to actually follow through and do something. And it's, did we evaluate, did that actually move the dial? Did it make a difference? So yeah, I love that in terms of, as you say, you don't need to be a data scientist, but, the influencing skills, the storytelling, seeing the wood through the trees in terms of, okay, we've got all of these metrics and things on a page, but what are the 3 things? You've got 3 asks of me as a business. I've probably got capacity to do 3 things. What are those three things that we need to think and do better?
Absolutely. And to, when you're talking about, we've got plethora of data and information, in taking things like that to the board, I also say link it back to, whether it's your revenue or what customers are saying or how satisfied they actually are, or retention of clients. Link it back to those business drivers. Don't leave it stand alone, because that actually will help influence the board. Other than being credible, the basics. Be credible, be prepared, be open to feedback, be honest as well. I always say, if you don't know, there's this terrible pressure to have everything sort of said and on the ball with when you're in front of a board. But I also say, just be honest and say, if you don't have that, but get back to them, and clarify how you need to get back to them. But, you've got to be able to talk margins. So if you're going to talk about, very simple, like turnover, don't just talk about turnover and how it's come down or gone up, but actually equate that to a dollar figure and say, well, what impact has that actually had on the balance sheet and the profit and loss statement? So it's just
move beyond employee engagement. Is what you're saying.
Move beyond engagement results.
Absolutely, those lag once a year factors. I mean, so I think I couldn't agree more. It's kind of, I suppose, what you're saying there is that we've got to understand what the business cares about. Go back to your point earlier at the beginning around what are the outcomes they care about that we're here to enable, and then how are we attributing those things that we're doing back to those and seeing, like, are we moving the dial? Is this actually having that desired impact or not? Love that. And I know I was saying that that was my last question, but this is my last question now, I promise. I know you do a lot of coaching and mentoring in your time, and I suppose if you were coaching the next generation of HR leaders, what's one or two capabilities that you tell them to start mastering now for 2030?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the first one is curiosity, a deep sense of curiosity. Ask questions. Really try. I mean, I think we're solvers of problems. We're constantly sort of leaning in on problems, which can make us sometimes not be as capable in showing curiosity and stepping back from the situation before we dive in. So I definitely say be insanely curious and ask questions before sort of diving in. Courage. I think courage is a really important skill. We've got a lot ahead of us, and they will require tough conversations and tough presence and healthy debates. But courage needs to be up there as being able to sort of take that risk and lean in. I would say, in amongst all of this change and transformation and courage and curiosity, do not lose your empathy and human soul.
What's that?
I've recently put out a LinkedIn article. I tend to write an article every month, but I was a little bit lazy for July and just put a post out, and I put something out on kindness because I think we could go one step too far in the HR profession to be heard, to be valuable, to be relevant.
Yeah.
And it might be at the cost of losing things like empathy and kindness and care. And I say in this article, you can be commercial and kind. It's you can make tough decisions and have tough conversations, but don't forget the care factor. And to walk in people's shoes. So it does. I just really caution us that we don't lose that, because if we lose that, we lose the integrity. We're not seen as the advocates for what's right, and ultimately we lose trust. And I think any HR professional will vouch for that. Sometimes it is really hard to build trust with our workforce, and there's, that perception at times of, is HR there? Is HR there for the organisation, or is HR there for us as people? And my answer when I'm asked this by my HR students at university, I say you're there for both. You have to balance that. And so hence curiosity to find out what's going on in each of those camps.
Yeah.
And the courage to have tough conversations. But I want to come back to the critical thinking as well.
No, I love that. I love that. No, well, look, thank you so much, Rita. I deeply personally appreciate the honesty, generosity that you brought to the conversation tonight. You're such a wealth of knowledge, and I always learn from you whenever we have a good chat. And I suppose for me, what really stood out to me was just the shared recognition that the CPO role is expanding. It always is evolving. I think we hear the analogy that, I hear it time and time again, that we're trying to run to top of a hill and hope that we get to the top, and then there's a bit of a plateau and we can have a rest. But I think, it isn't the top. There's another peak and then another peak. So I think for me, it's just that we've just got to embrace the pace of change and everything. So why do we need to kill ourselves running and racing as quickly as possible? But it's also our opportunity to really shape the future of work and business performance. And I think as we started this conversation, there is, for me, I'm a glass half full optimist. I am hugely excited, but at the same time, we need to be balanced. And I think as we heard tonight, we don't need to have all the answers.
No.
But what we do need is we need to be at the table. We need to be asking better questions. We need to use better data and insight and actually act upon that. I think that's the key thing. Let's actually do something with it. And I love your points at the end there that we need to lead with courage, curiosity, and kindness, I think, for me. And yeah, what a way. So thank you so much, Rita.
Oh, thank you so much, Philip. And it was an absolute pleasure and honour to be with you today and be really challenged with all those fantastic questions. And thank you so much again.